Welcome back to Bella Dark Tales. I am so glad you are here tonight, settling in, getting comfortable, because what I have for you this evening is something that genuinely unsettled me when I first read it. Before we get into it, I want to give a very special thank you to the person who sent this story in. His name is Derek Callahan, and he wrote to us from Bozeman, Montana. Derek, thank you so much for trusting us with this. He said, and I am quoting him here, that he has never told this story to anyone outside of his immediate family, and that even they do not fully believe him. He said he is sharing it now because he needs someone else to know what happened out there. He needs it to exist somewhere outside of his own head. So Derek, we hear you. We believe you. And to everyone listening, I want you to remember that as you hear this story tonight. Someone lived this. Someone is still living with this. Alright. Let us get into it. Derek had always been a trail runner. Not in the casual, weekend warrior sense of the word, but in the obsessive, pre-dawn alarm clock, callous feet and black toenails sense of the word. He had been running trails since he was 19 years old, cutting his teeth on the easier forest paths outside of Missoula where he grew up. And by the time he was 31 he had completed 7 ultramarathons, including a 100-miler in Colorado that had broken 3 of the men who started alongside him. Derek was not the kind of person who scared easily on a trail. He had run at night. He had run in rain so heavy he could not see the path markers ahead of him. He had run through terrain that most people would not hike with a full guide team. He knew wilderness the way some people know their own neighborhoods. He knew how to read a forest. He knew what sounds belonged and what sounds did not. That is why what happened in September of 2019, on a trail in the Gallatin National Forest, shook him the way it did. Because Derek was not someone who spooked. Derek was someone who went toward the unsettling thing, identified it, and moved on. At least he had been that person, before that trail. He told me the story started the way all of his runs started. Ordinary. Almost boring in its ordinariness. He had driven out to the trailhead alone, which was normal for him. His running partner at the time, a guy named Chris, had pulled out the night before with a knee issue. Derek had thought about postponing the run, but the weather forecast for that weekend was perfect, and he had been planning this particular route for 2 months. It was a loop trail, technically, though not a well-known one. He had found it mentioned in a regional hiking forum, a thread that was a few years old, and the handful of people who had written about it described it as remote, beautiful, and worth the effort of finding the unmarked access road. One person had written, and Derek remembered this clearly, that it was the kind of trail that made you feel like the last person on earth, in the best possible way. He pulled into the small gravel lot at the trailhead just before 6 in the morning. There were no other cars. The air was cold and sharp in that particular September way that feels like the season is warning you about what is coming, and the sky was that deep pre-dawn blue that turns everything into a silhouette. He stretched at the back of his truck, drank half a water bottle, checked that his pack had everything it needed. 2 liters of water, energy gels, a small first aid kit, a headlamp even though he expected to be done well before dark, his phone with the downloaded offline map, and a compass. He always brought a compass, even when he thought he would not need it. Something his father had drilled into him when he was a boy. You do not go into the woods without a compass, Derek. Maps lie. Technology fails. A compass is the only thing that will always tell you the truth. He started the run at 6:14 in the morning. He remembered the time because he always logged his start times. The trail began ordinarily enough, a well-worn single-track path that cut through a meadow still silver with frost, then entered the tree line in a gentle, welcoming way, the kind of forest entrance that does not feel threatening at all. Pines mostly, with some aspen mixed in, and the light coming through the trees in long pale shafts the way it only does in early morning. Derek settled into his pace immediately, that easy, sustainable rhythm that experienced trail runners find and hold like a heartbeat, and he felt, he said, genuinely happy. Genuinely at peace. This was the thing running gave him that nothing else could, this complete silence of the thinking mind, this total absorption into the body and the moment and the path ahead. He ran like that for about 40 minutes without anything of note happening. The trail was good. Well defined, with occasional cairns marking the path where it became less obvious, and the terrain was interesting without being punishing. He climbed gradually for the first portion, gaining elevation through a series of long switchbacks, and then the trail leveled out along a ridge that gave him a view across an enormous valley still filling with morning light. He stopped for a moment there, which he almost never did, just to look at it. He said it was genuinely one of the most beautiful views he had ever seen from a trail, and he had seen a lot of beautiful views. He ate half an energy gel, took 2 long pulls of water, and kept moving. It was around the 2-hour mark, so roughly 8 in the morning, that the first thing happened. The thing that he would later identify as the moment everything started to change, even though at the time he dismissed it as nothing. He came around a long sweeping bend in the trail and found himself in a small clearing, circular in shape, maybe 60 feet across. The clearing was unremarkable in most ways. Grass, a few rocks, a dead tree that had fallen across one edge of it. But in the center of the clearing, there was a cairn. And not just any cairn. It was enormous. Built from river stones that should not have been anywhere near this location given how far they were from any water source, the cairn was easily 4 feet tall and perfectly constructed, the stones fitted together with a precision that suggested either tremendous patience or tremendous practice. Derek stopped when he saw it. He was not afraid of it, not at that moment. He was curious about it. He walked over to it, circled it slowly, noticed that the stones were dry and slightly mossy on their northern faces, which suggested the cairn had been there for some time. But the thing that gave him a small, brief chill, the thing he noted and then set aside, was that there was no trail leading into or out of this clearing from any direction except the one he had come from. The trail he was following entered the clearing from the south and continued out from the north. But the cairn was not positioned on the trail. It was positioned in the center of the clearing, off to the side, as if it had been built not to mark a path but for some other purpose entirely. For what purpose, Derek could not say. He took a picture of it with his phone, then continued north on the trail. He ran for another 45 minutes. The forest grew denser here, and quieter, and he noticed that the ambient sounds of the wilderness, bird calls, the distant percussion of a woodpecker, the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush, had faded almost entirely. That was unusual. In his experience, quiet forests were often forests that something had recently moved through, something large enough to cause the smaller animals to stop and listen. He was aware of this, and he ran a quick mental inventory. Bear country, certainly. He had bear spray clipped to the right shoulder strap of his pack. Mountain lion country as well, which was why he tried to keep his pace steady and never stopped moving in a way that might make him look like prey. He told himself the quiet was just the time of day, just the density of the trees, just the fact that this trail was remote enough that the wildlife had not been habituated to human presence. He told himself that, and he kept running. The second thing happened at around the 3-hour mark. He had descended from the ridge and entered a long, narrow valley that the trail wound through, following the natural contour of the land. The valley was beautiful in a different way than the ridge had been, more enclosed, more intimate, the trees growing close on both sides and the light filtering down in a diffuse, greenish way that gave everything a slightly underwater quality. He was moving well, feeling good, his legs loose and his breathing easy, when he noticed something ahead of him on the trail. He slowed. And then he stopped. It was a pair of hiking boots. Just sitting there in the middle of the trail. Sitting, not lying, not scattered, sitting upright, side by side, as if someone had carefully placed them there. They were well-worn trail boots, the kind with a Vibram sole, brown leather upper, red laces. Size 10 or 11, he guessed. Men's boots. And they were not old. The leather was not cracked, the soles were not peeling. These were boots that had been there for, at most, a few days. Derek stood and looked at them for a long moment. His mind offered him several explanations. Someone had taken their boots off for a rest and forgotten them. Someone had cached them here for a reason he could not guess. Someone had been airlifted out of the area due to an injury and left the boots behind. All of these were possible. All of them were unlikely. You do not forget your boots on a backcountry trail. You do not cache boots. And if you had been airlifted out, the rescue team would have retrieved your gear. He looked around the trail in both directions. He looked into the trees on either side. Nothing moved. There was no one there. He looked at the boots for another moment, then stepped carefully around them and continued up the trail. He did not touch them. This, he said, was his first mistake. He should have turned around then. Not because of the boots specifically, but because of what the boots, combined with the cairn, combined with the unnatural quiet, was telling him. His instincts were trying to say something to him, and he was choosing not to listen. He was rationalizing. He was doing what people do when they are in a situation that feels wrong but that their conscious mind cannot find a concrete reason to flee from. He was overriding the alarm. He kept running. About 20 minutes later, the trail began to behave strangely. Now Derek was careful to explain this part of the story in detail, because he knew how it would sound. He had a downloaded offline map on his phone. He had a compass. And yet the trail began to take him in directions that did not align with either. Not dramatically at first. Subtle. A curve here that seemed to take him slightly east when he should have been heading north. A descent that he did not remember seeing on the elevation profile. He checked his phone map and saw that the blue dot representing his location was moving normally, still on the trail, still heading in the right direction. He checked his compass and it was pointing north as expected. He told himself the trail was just less regular than it had looked on paper, that trails always look cleaner on a digital map than they are in reality. But then the trail split. There was no split marked on his map. No junction, no fork, just the single line of the trail continuing north. But here in front of him was an unmistakable fork. Two paths of roughly equal width and definition diverging at an angle of maybe 30 degrees from each other. Both paths looked equally traveled. Both paths disappeared into the trees at roughly the same distance ahead. There was no signage. No cairn marking one path over the other. Nothing to tell him which direction was correct. He checked his phone map again. The blue dot sat exactly on the trail line, which showed no fork. He held the phone up and moved it slightly left, slightly right, as if he could calibrate it into showing him something more accurate. It showed nothing new. He checked his compass. North was to his left, which suggested the left fork was the more northerly option, which was the direction he needed to travel. He took the left fork. He ran for about 10 minutes before the trail simply ended. Not ended in a natural way, not ended at a meadow or a viewpoint or a stream crossing, but ended in the way that only happens when something man-made has been abandoned. The path became gradually less defined, the undergrowth encroaching from both sides, and then after a narrowing that forced him to turn sideways to push through a wall of young spruce trees, the path was just gone. There was no more trail. There was forest, untouched and trackless, in every direction. Derek stopped. He turned around. He could see the narrowing through the spruce trees behind him, the ghost of the path he had followed to get here. He pushed back through and stood in the slightly more defined section of trail he had come from, breathing slowly, thinking. He was not lost. He knew approximately where he was. He knew the general direction of the trailhead. If he backtracked to the fork and took the right path, he would likely be back on the main trail within minutes. He was not in danger. He was mildly annoyed and more than mildly puzzled, but he was not in danger. He turned and started walking back the way he had come. He heard the voice when he had taken perhaps 30 steps. It came from somewhere in the trees to his left, off the trail, in the direction he had come from, but maybe 40 or 50 feet into the forest. It was a human voice. A man's voice. And it was saying something he could not quite make out, not words exactly, more like a murmur, a low, continuous murmur of sound that had the rhythm of speech but not the clarity. Like someone talking quietly to themselves. Derek stopped walking. He stood completely still. The sound continued for about 10 seconds and then stopped. He waited. Nothing. He called out. "Hello? Is someone there?" Silence. He waited another 30 seconds. Called out again. No response. He stood there for a moment longer, listening to the quality of the silence, and then he began walking again, faster now, back toward the fork. His heart rate had increased, which he noted clinically, the way you note changes in your own body when your training teaches you to pay attention to them. He reached the fork and took the right path. This one was immediately more defined, wider, with fresh boot prints visible and a muddy section near a small crossing of a seasonal stream. Someone had been through here recently. He was back on the right trail. He picked up his pace, moving toward a run, and was beginning to feel better about the situation when he rounded a corner and almost ran directly into a man standing in the middle of the path. Derek pulled up hard, nearly losing his footing, and the man did not move. Just stood there. He was facing away from Derek, looking up the trail in the direction Derek had been heading. He was wearing olive green hiking pants, a brown long-sleeved shirt, no jacket, no pack, no hat, no poles. His hands were at his sides. He was average height, average build, with dark hair that needed cutting, and he was standing with a peculiar stillness that seemed, to Derek in that first moment of seeing him, not quite natural. Not the stillness of someone who was resting or looking at something. More like the stillness of someone who was listening. Derek said, his heart hammering now, "Hey there. Sorry, did not see you." The man turned around slowly. Derek said it was the slowness of the turn that he noticed first, the deliberate, unhurried quality of it, as if the man had all the time in the world and had simply decided that this was the moment to turn. The man's face was ordinary. Mid-40s, maybe. A few days of stubble. Dark eyes. No expression that Derek could read. The man looked at Derek for a moment and said, in a voice that was perfectly calm and perfectly flat, "You took the wrong fork." Derek said, "Yeah, I figured that out. The left fork dead ends." The man said, "Both forks dead end?" Derek looked at him. He said, "What do you mean?" "I just came from the right fork. It looks like a trail to me." The man said, "This section of trail does not go anywhere. It loops. People get confused up here." Derek said, "But I came in from the south. The trailhead is that way. I just need to backtrack." The man looked at him for a moment without saying anything, and then he said, "Where did you start?" Derek told him the name of the trailhead parking lot. The man's expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes, some small adjustment that Derek could not name. And then the man said, "That trailhead is not accessible from this trail. You must have taken a wrong turn somewhere earlier." Derek felt a cold, slow feeling move through him that had nothing to do with the morning air. He said, "That is not possible. I have been on this trail for 3 hours. I have not made any turns." The man said, and Derek remembered every word of this clearly, "Well, you are here now. That is what matters." And then the man turned back around, facing up the trail, away from Derek, and was quiet. Derek stood there for a moment, looking at the back of this man's head. His instincts were screaming now. Every primitive, survival-encoded piece of him was saying something is wrong, something is wrong, something is wrong. But the man had not done anything threatening. He had not moved toward Derek. He had not raised his voice. He was just standing in the middle of a trail in the middle of a forest, which was, technically, a thing that hikers did. Derek said, "Are you heading back toward the trailhead?" Without turning around, the man said, "No." Derek said, "Okay. Have a good hike." And he started walking. He walked past the man, giving him a wide berth, his eyes forward, his pace quick and controlled, every muscle in his body wanting to run. He did not run. He walked. Because something told him that running would change things, that running would make him pray in some way he could not articulate, and so he walked, steady and deliberate, up the trail, away from the man. He had gone about 100 yards when he could not stop himself from looking back. The man was gone. Not walking away. Not standing there watching him go. Gone. The trail behind Derek was empty in both directions as far as he could see. Derek ran. He ran hard, not his trail running pace, not his careful, measured stride calibrated to the terrain, but an actual sprint, or as close to one as the trail surface allowed, and he ran for about 2 minutes straight before the trail began to feel wrong again. He forced himself to slow, forced himself to check his phone, check his compass, look for landmarks. The compass said he was heading north. His phone showed him still on the trail. But the trees around him looked different. Denser. Darker. The light had changed, which made sense because it was now past mid-morning and the sun had risen higher. But the light was not right. It was dimmer than it should have been. He stopped and looked up through the canopy. Clouds had moved in, a flat gray overcast that had replaced the blue sky without him noticing when it happened. That happened in the mountains. Weather moved fast. He told himself it was fine. He started running again, slower this time, controlled, watching the trail carefully. 20 minutes later, he came back to the clearing with the cairn. He stood at the edge of the clearing and looked at the 4-foot tower of river stones in its center, and he felt something happen to his sense of reality, some small fracture in his certainty about the world, because he had been running north. He had checked his compass multiple times. He had been running north consistently. The trailhead was south of this clearing, which meant, if he had passed through this clearing heading north 3 hours ago, he should not be seeing it now. He should only see it if he had somehow, without knowing it, turned around and started heading south again. He looked at his compass. North was behind him. He was facing south. He was heading south. He had been running south, thinking he was running north. Somehow, somewhere in the last 20 minutes of running, his sense of direction had completely inverted, and his compass, which he had been consulting regularly, had apparently been telling him north was north when he was already facing south, which meant either he had misread it every single time, or something else was happening that he did not have a framework for. He sat down at the edge of the clearing. He forced himself to breathe slowly. He forced himself to think. Okay. He was disoriented. This happened to people in the woods, even experienced people. Spatial disorientation was a real, documented phenomenon. There were studies on it. The mind could get confused, especially in dense forests where visual cues were limited. He was probably fine. He just needed to recalibrate. He pulled up his offline map. The blue dot showed him exactly where he was, at the clearing with the cairn, which was correctly positioned on the map. The trailhead was to the south, the direction he had been running, which was correct. He had been running in the right direction after all. His compass was telling him north was behind him, but according to the map, behind him was south, which meant his compass was wrong. He took the compass out of his pack and held it level, moved it away from his body, away from his pack and its metal components, and watched the needle settle. North, according to the compass, was now to his right, which, according to the map, was west. His compass was wrong. In 2 different ways within 5 minutes. Derek said he sat there with that information for a long time. He is a rational man. He does not believe in the supernatural. He has never had a religious experience of any kind. He was raised to find explanations for things, to follow the logic wherever it led. And the logical explanation for a malfunctioning compass was simple enough. Something was affecting the magnetic field. Certain types of rock could do that. Certain types of mineral deposits in the ground. Lodestone. Magnetite. There were places in the world where compasses simply did not work correctly, and there was no mystery in that, no horror, just geology. He told himself that. He believed it, mostly. He decided to navigate by the map alone, using landmarks and the topography visible on screen to guide him back to the trailhead. He stood up, oriented himself with the map, and started south, walking now rather than running, watching his phone screen carefully. He had been walking for about 5 minutes when he heard the sound. It was not the murmuring voice he had heard earlier. It was something different. It was, and he struggled to describe this accurately, a kind of rhythmic sound, steady and low, that seemed to come from everywhere at once rather than from any specific direction. He stopped and listened. It had a regularity to it, almost like breathing, but too slow to be any animal's breathing, a long, deep inhalation sound that lasted maybe 4 seconds, and then a pause, and then an exhalation that lasted another 4 seconds. Long, slow breath sounds, enormous and sourceless, coming from the forest itself. He stood there and listened to it for what he said was approximately 2 minutes. And then it stopped. Just cut off, mid-exhalation, and the forest was silent. He started walking again, faster. He came back to the boots. The pair of hiking boots in the middle of the trail. Still there. Still perfectly upright, side by side, toes pointing north. Exactly as he had found them hours earlier. He had not moved them when he first passed them, and they had not moved on their own. But something was different about them now. They were wet. Not damp. Wet. As if they had been recently submerged in water, the leather darkened, droplets still clinging to the laces and the tongue, a small puddle forming beneath each boot on the dry trail surface. And there was no water source near here. No stream, no standing water. Nothing that could explain how a pair of boots sitting on a dry trail in dry air had become thoroughly soaked in the hours since he had last seen them. Derek stared at the boots for a long time. He took another photo. Then he stepped around them again and kept walking. He wanted to run, but he did not. He was rationing his energy now. He did not know how much farther the trailhead was, and his water was getting low. He needed to be smart about this. He needed to be calm. He was not calm. He was performing calm, which is different, and Derek knew the difference, had learned it over years of running difficult races in difficult conditions. Performing calm is what you do when genuine calm is not available. You go through the motions of it. You control your breathing. You keep your face neutral. You do not look into the trees, because looking into the trees means your brain has already decided there is something there worth looking for, and you do not want to confirm that for yourself. He did not look into the trees. He focused on the trail ahead and he walked south and he watched his phone and he kept moving. The trail began to smell different. He noticed it gradually, the way you notice a smell when it builds rather than hits you all at once. It was a wet smell, a cold smell, the particular smell of deep water or water that has been sitting in a dark place, the kind of smell that old wells have. It grew stronger as he walked, until it was thick enough that he could almost taste it, that cold wet darkness, and he looked up from his phone and found that the trail had narrowed considerably and the trees on both sides were so close now that their branches interlocked overhead, forming a canopy so dense that it blocked what little light the overcast sky was offering. He was in a tunnel of trees. On both sides dark and close. Ahead more darkness. Behind the same. And in the darkness ahead of him, something was standing. He could not see it clearly. He could see it the way you see things in low light, as a suggestion of shape, a density of darkness slightly greater than the darkness around it. But it was there. The shape of something upright and approximately human-sized, standing in the middle of the narrow trail, maybe 30 yards ahead of him. Not moving. Just standing. Derek stopped. He did not call out this time. He did not say hello. He stood there in the tunnel of trees and looked at the shape in the darkness ahead of him, and he felt, for the first time in this entire story, genuinely afraid. Not the manageable fear that comes from a rational threat, not the alertness of an animal that has heard a predator. Something older than that. Something that came from a part of his brain that he did not normally have access to, a part that was very old and very serious and that said, in a voice quieter than thought, "Do not move toward that thing." He did not move toward it. He stood there for what he said was about 30 seconds, which is a very long time when you are standing in a dark tunnel of trees looking at something that may or may not be a person standing very still in the middle of your path home. And then the shape moved. Not toward him. It moved to the side, stepping off the trail and into the trees to the right, slowly, without any sound that Derek could hear, and then it was gone. The darkness where it had been was just darkness again, empty and uniform. Derek said he stood there for another full minute after that. And then he started moving, because standing still was not a better option. He walked quickly, keeping his eyes ahead, moving through the tunnel of trees toward the place where the shape had been standing, and when he reached that spot he looked to the right into the trees but saw nothing, absolutely nothing, just the dark forest receding into itself, no sign of anything that had been standing there. He did not stop. He kept moving. The tunnel of trees ended another 100 yards ahead, opening up into a wider section of trail that was brighter and less oppressive, and Derek took his first full, clean breath in what felt like a long time. He checked his phone. According to the map, he was about 1.5 miles from the trailhead. 1.5 miles. He could run that in 15 minutes on a good trail in good conditions. These were not good conditions and he was not feeling good, but 15 minutes. He could do 15 minutes. He started running. He ran hard, not quite a sprint but faster than was probably smart for the terrain, and he watched the blue dot on his phone screen moving steadily toward the trailhead marker. 1/2 mile. Then 1/4 mile. He was getting close enough now that the trail was becoming familiar, the same frost-silvered meadow he had run through at the start, the same gentle forest entrance but from the other side now, and he could feel the gravel of the parking lot before he saw it, could feel the transition in his feet through his shoes. He burst out of the tree line into the parking lot and stopped, his hands on his knees, breathing hard. His truck was there. Right where he had left it. There was one other vehicle in the lot now, a gray pickup, older model, with a cracked windshield and a rusted bumper. It had not been there when he arrived. He had not seen another car on the access road. He looked at it, and noted it, and went to his own truck and unlocked it, and got in and sat for a moment with the door open, breathing the open air. He looked back at the trailhead entrance. The man was standing there. The man from the trail. The one he had encountered at the fork, the one who had said, "You are here now, that is what matters." Standing at the trailhead entrance, just inside the tree line, in almost exactly the same posture he had been in when Derek first found him, facing away, looking up the trail. Derek started his truck. He pulled out of the parking lot without looking back, down the long gravel access road toward the highway, and he did not stop until he reached the gas station at the edge of Bozeman 25 minutes later. He sat in the gas station parking lot for a while, and then he went inside and bought a bottle of water and a candy bar and stood at the counter and told the person working there, a teenager who was clearly not expecting a story like this, that he had just come from the Gallatin National Forest and there was a man up there who seemed lost or strange and could someone call the ranger station. The ranger station did send someone out. Derek knows this because he called back later that day to follow up. The rangers found nothing. No one at the trailhead. No gray pickup truck in the lot. No sign of anyone on the trail. Derek told me there are several things he still thinks about regularly. He thinks about the cairn and who built it and why it was in the middle of a clearing rather than on the trail. He thinks about the boots and how they got wet. He thinks about the sound, the enormous, slow-breathing sound that came from everywhere at once and belonged to nothing he can name. He thinks about the shape in the tunnel of trees, and what it was doing standing there, and where it went. But mostly, he told me, he thinks about what the man said to him. Both forks dead end. He has gone back and looked at that trail on multiple mapping platforms, and the trail does not have a fork. There is no fork shown on any map. There is no fork in the trail description on any hiking forum he has found. And yet he was there. He stood at it. He made a choice. He said he sometimes wonders if the right thing to do would have been to not take either fork. To turn around when he first encountered the fork, to take it as a sign that the trail itself was offering him a chance to leave. He wonders if the man, whoever or whatever he was, had been trying to warn him with that statement, or had been trying to tell him something else entirely, something Derek does not have the language or the framework to understand. He said he has not run that trail again. He said he has not run alone in remote wilderness since. He runs with Chris now, his friend, always. He always tells someone exactly where he is going. He always checks in by text when he is back at his car. And he has not gone back to look for the gray pickup truck or the man who was standing at the trailhead when he left. Some things, Derek said in his message to us, you do not go looking for after you get away from them. Some things, you just leave on the trail. Now, Derek did not simply go home that evening and try to forget what happened. That is not who Derek is. He is methodical. He is the kind of man who needs to understand things, who cannot leave a question sitting unanswered without at least trying to find the answer, even when part of him suspects that the answer is going to be worse than the question. So he went home, he showered, he ate, and then he sat down at his kitchen table with his laptop and a cup of coffee, and he started looking. He started with the trail itself. He went back to the regional hiking forum where he had originally found the mention of the trail, the thread that was a few years old, the one with the handful of comments about how remote and beautiful and worth the effort it was. He found the thread easily enough. But when he read through it more carefully this time, now that he had context for what he had experienced, he noticed things he had not noticed the first time around. The original post was from a user with the handle Pacific Crest Pete, dated almost 4 years before Derek's run. Pete had described the trail in glowing terms, the remoteness, the views, the sense of solitude. He had called it his favorite discovery of that year. He had posted 2 photographs, one of the meadow at the start of the trail, one of the ridge view that Derek himself had stopped to admire. Both photographs looked exactly like what Derek had seen, same meadow, same valley below the ridge, same quality of light. The first comment on the post was from someone called Gallatin, girl, who said she had tried to find the trail based on Pete's description and could not locate the access road. She asked for more specific directions. Pete had responded with detailed instructions, a specific mileage marker on the highway, a left turn onto an unmarked gravel road, a cattle gate that was usually open, a small hand-painted sign on a fence post that said something Derek could not read clearly in Pete's description because the screenshot quality was poor. The second comment was from someone called Trail Dog Montana, who said he had done the loop twice and agreed it was beautiful but noted, and this is the part that stopped Derek cold, that the trail markers were unreliable in the middle section and that hikers should be prepared for some route-finding challenges. He had also written, and Derek read this several times to make sure he was reading it correctly, that he had found the experience of the middle section of the trail to be what he described as atmospherically strange, that the forest in that area gave him a persistent and irrational feeling of being watched, and that on his second visit he had brought his dog, a large and typically unflappable German shepherd named Rex, and that Rex had refused to enter the valley section of the trail at all, had stopped at a specific point, had lowered his body toward the ground, had begun making a sound Trail Dog Montana described as not quite barking and not quite whining but something in between, something he had never heard Rex make before or since, and had then turned around and walked back up the trail toward the ridge, refusing to respond to commands, refusing to return to his owner's side until his owner had also retreated from the valley. Trail Dog Montana had written that he had completed the loop on his second visit by going around the valley rather than through it, adding significant mileage to the route, because he was not willing to go through the valley without his dog and his dog was not willing to go at all. Derek sat with that for a while. He kept reading. There were several more comments on the thread, most of them from people who had not visited the trail and were simply expressing interest or asking questions. But near the bottom of the thread, posted almost a year after the original post, was a comment from a user with no profile picture and no posting history outside of this single comment. The username was simply the letter M, followed by a string of numbers that meant nothing to Derek. The comment was brief. It said only this: I would advise people not to seek out this trail. There have been incidents in that area over many years. People go in. Not all of them come out the same. I am not in a position to say more here. Please just be careful. The comment had 0 responses. No one had asked what incidents. No one had pressed for more information. Either the thread had died by that point, and no one was monitoring it, or everyone who had seen the comment had simply chosen not to engage with it. Derek could not tell which. He tried to find the user M+ numbers. No other posts anywhere on the forum. He tried to send a direct message. The account appeared to be inactive or deleted. He got no response. He spent the next hour searching for incident reports in the Gallatin National Forest, filtering for the rough geographic area he had been in based on his phone's location data from the run. The Gallatin was a big forest, almost 2 million acres, and incidents were not uncommon: hikers getting lost, occasional animal encounters, the rare injury or medical emergency. He was not looking for anything specific, just seeing what was there. He found 3 things that he thought might be relevant, though he acknowledged that he might be reaching, that a man who has just had a frightening experience in a place will naturally be inclined to find patterns that confirm his fear. The first was a brief news item from a local Bozeman paper, dated 6 years before Derek's run. A solo hiker, male, age 44, had been reported missing after failing to return from a day hike in a section of the Gallatin that, based on the general description of the area in the article, could have been the same trail Derek had run. The article was short and did not include the specific trail name. The hiker, whose name was given as Robert Shear, had been missing for 11 days when the article was published, and the search had been scaled back. There was no follow-up article that Derek could find. He did not know if Robert Shear had ever been found. The second thing was older, a digitized record from what appeared to be a county historical archive, a handwritten log from a Forest Service patrol from many decades earlier, scanned and uploaded as part of a local history project. The handwriting was difficult to read and the language was formal and clipped in the way official records from that era tended to be, but one entry caught Derek's attention. It noted that the patrol had investigated reports from local ranchers of unexplained sounds from a specific forested valley in the area, described by the ranchers as prolonged and sourceless, resembling breath or wind but occurring in windless conditions. The patrol had investigated and found no explanation. A subsequent entry, a few weeks later, noted that one member of the original patrol had requested a transfer to a different district, and that the request had been granted without discussion. The third thing was the one that stayed with Derek the longest. It was a post on a different website entirely, not a hiking forum but a site dedicated to what its users called unexplained encounters, the kind of site that Derek had never in his life visited before that evening and that he approached with significant skepticism. But the post, written by someone identifying themselves only as a woman from a rural area of Montana who had grown up near the Gallatin, described in plain and specific language a piece of local oral history that she said had been passed down in her family for generations. She wrote that her grandmother had told her that there was a section of the Gallatin forest that the local indigenous people of the region had avoided for as long as anyone could remember. Not out of superstition exactly, but out of what her grandmother described as a practical wisdom, a recognition that the land in that particular area did not behave in ways that could be relied upon. She said her grandmother had used a phrase that the woman had never been able to find in any written record, a phrase in a language she did not speak herself and could only reproduce phonetically, and that when she had eventually found someone who could translate it, the closest English equivalent she was given was something like the place where the path loops back on itself, though the translator had said that translation was imprecise. That there was something in the original phrase about not just the path but the act of choosing, the suggestion being that the path looping back was not just a description of the geography but a description of what happened to a person who entered that space and made the wrong choice within it. She did not elaborate on what the wrong choice was or what the looping back meant for the person who had made it. Derek said he read that post 3 times. He is not a superstitious person. He has no framework for what that phrase might mean in any literal sense. But he said that when he read it, sitting at his kitchen table at 2 in the morning with his cold coffee and his screen-tired eyes, something settled into place in his mind with a click that he could not explain, and has not been able to unclick since. The place where the path loops back on itself. He had run north for hours and ended up south. He had gone deeper into a place he was trying to exit. He had made choices at a fork that should not have existed, and both choices had been wrong. The path had looped back on itself. He had gotten out. Not because of anything he had done correctly, or so he believed, but because of something he had not done. He had not followed the shape in the tunnel of trees. He had not approached the man again after their second non-encounter. He had not stopped in the clearing with the cairn. He had kept moving. He had gotten out. Robert Shear, the man from the article, had not gotten out. Or at least, there was no record that he had. Derek closed his laptop at 2:30 in the morning and sat in his dark kitchen for a while. He thought about the man at the trailhead when he was leaving, standing at the forest entrance, looking up the trail. He thought about the gray pickup truck that the rangers had not found. He thought about a man standing at the edge of a trail in the early evening, looking into the woods, and then he tried very hard not to think about what might have come out of those woods to take the truck while the man had gone back in. He went to bed. He did not sleep well for several weeks after that. He has talked about it with his girlfriend since then, now his wife, and she does not fully believe him. Not because she thinks he is lying, but because the alternative to him having made some kind of navigational error and spooked himself with the shadows is something she would rather not believe. Derek understands that. He gives her that comfort. He does not push it. He talked about it once with Chris, his running partner, on a long training run in the daylight on a familiar trail close to town. Chris had listened quietly and at the end had said, and Derek found this oddly comforting, that he was glad Derek had made it back to the truck. Just that. Not an explanation, not a dismissal. Just that simple statement of gladness. Derek had said he was glad too. And they had run the rest of the route in silence, which was its own kind of comfort. Now, there is a detail Derek included in his message to us that I have been saving for this part of the story, because it is the detail that I personally find most unsettling, and I wanted you to be well and truly inside this story before I gave it to you. When Derek got home that evening from the run and before he did any of the research I just described, he uploaded the photos he had taken on the trail to his laptop. He had taken 2 photos, you will remember. One of the cairn in the clearing, taken early in his run, and one of the boots on the trail, taken later. He uploaded both and opened them to look at them. The photo of the cairn was fine. Clear, well exposed, the stone tower standing in the center of the clearing exactly as he remembered it. The grass around it still frosty in the early morning light. Nothing unusual about it. The photo of the boots was different. The boots were there, as he remembered them. Still upright, side by side, toes pointing north, the red laces visible, the dark wet leather. All of that was there. But standing in the trees behind the boots, partially obscured by shadow and distance, captured in the background of a photo Derek had taken alone on a trail where he believed no one else was present, was a figure. A person-shaped darkness in the trees, maybe 70 or 80 feet behind the boots, half hidden by the trunks, difficult to make out clearly but absolutely, unambiguously there. Not an artifact of the camera, not a trick of shadow. A shape in the trees that had 2 arms and 2 legs and a head and that was oriented, as far as Derek could tell from its posture, to face the camera. To face Derek. When he took that photo, Derek had been alone on the trail. Or he had believed he was alone on the trail. And whatever had been in those trees behind him, when he stood photographing the boots had not made a sound. Had not moved. Had simply stood there and watched him photograph the boots and then watched him walk away. Derek said he has looked at that photo many times since then. He has zoomed in, he has adjusted the brightness and contrast, he has shown it to people whose visual judgment he trusts. Everyone who looks at it agrees that there is a figure in the trees. No one who looks at it can tell him what that figure is or how it came to be standing there. He did not send us the photo. He said he thought about it and decided he was not comfortable sharing it. He said he keeps it on his laptop, in a folder, and that occasionally he opens it and looks at it, not because he wants to see it but because he feels the need to confirm that it is still real, that it exists, that it is not something his frightened mind constructed after the fact. It is still there. Every time he looks. Still in the trees. Still watching. He said that is the thing that keeps him honest about the whole experience, that keeps him from allowing himself to settle into the comfortable explanation of navigational error and an overactive imagination. The figure in the photo does not care about his rational explanations. The figure in the photo does not go away when he finds a better theory. It just stands there in the dark between the trees and looks at the camera and waits for him to look back. Some trails, Derek wrote to us at the end of his message, are not just trails. I do not know what that means exactly. I am not a person who has a philosophy for this kind of thing. But I have been running trails for over a decade, and I know what a trail is supposed to be, and I know what that trail was not. A trail is a path from one place to another. It goes somewhere. What I was on that day, I do not know what you would call it. I do not know what it was going toward, or what it was trying to bring me to. I just know I got off it. And whatever is still on it, I hope it does not find its way to the other end. I hope he does not find his way back. Now, Derek, I want to say something directly to you, because you trusted us with this and you deserve more than a retelling. What you experienced on that trail, the disorientation, the impossible navigation, the figure in the photo, the man at the trailhead, all of it, is something that a lot of people in the community of those who study these kinds of encounters would recognize immediately. There is a documented pattern. Remote wilderness, single traveler, a trail or path that begins to behave in ways that contradict the map, sounds without source, figures seen at a distance, and a pervasive, bone-deep wrongness that the person experiencing it cannot fully articulate but never fully forgets. Some researchers who study these things, and they do exist, serious people with serious academic backgrounds, call it a geospatial anomaly. Some indigenous oral traditions across North America and elsewhere describe places where the ordinary rules of the land do not apply, where intention and direction become unstable, where something in the environment responds to the presence of a human being in ways that go beyond what ecology or geology can account for. Derek is not the first person to come off a trail like that one. He is not the first person to describe a man standing on a path who does not behave the way a person should behave. He is not the first person to look at a photograph taken in a place they believed was empty and find that it was not empty. He may, by the grace of whatever kept him moving when everything in that forest was trying to make him stop, be one of the luckier ones. Because there is one more thing I want to tell you before we close out tonight. One more piece of this that I want to leave with you, not to frighten you more than the story already has, but because I think it is important, because I think it is part of what makes this story true in the way that real things are true. After Derek sent us his story, I did some of my own research. Not into the trail specifically, because he had asked us not to share the specific location, and we are honoring that, but into the broader pattern of what he experienced. And in that research I found a study, a small and not widely known study from a group of wilderness survival researchers in Canada, who had collected accounts from backcountry travelers across North America who reported what the researchers called trail displacement events. Experiences in which the traveler became convinced that the trail they were on was behaving in ways inconsistent with their map, their compass, and their memory. The study collected 47 accounts over a 10-year period. 47 people who described experiences with enough similarity to Derek's that reading through the summaries was, honestly, one of the more unsettling things I have done for this channel. Disorientation despite navigational aids. Sounds without source. Human or human-like figures seen at a distance, often described as unnaturally still, often described as present in one location and then absent without having been seen to move. In a significant number of accounts, a figure or figures seen at the trailhead upon exit, after no vehicles or other hikers had been seen upon entry. Of the 47 people who submitted accounts, 42 reported getting back to their vehicle or to a known safe location without physical harm. The remaining 5 accounts were submitted not by the travelers themselves but by family members or, in 2 cases, by search and rescue personnel who had been involved in cases where the traveler had been reported missing after the incident and had not been found. 5 out of 47 did not make it back. The researchers noted this with appropriate caution, acknowledging that the connection between the displacement event and the disappearance could not be confirmed, that people go missing in wilderness for many ordinary and tragic reasons. But they noted it. They put it in the study. Because they were serious people doing serious work and they were not willing to pretend the number was not there. Derek made it back. He is one of the 42. He is in his house in Bozeman with his wife and his running shoes and his photo in a folder on his laptop and the knowledge, quiet and permanent, of what was standing in the trees behind him when he did not know anyone was there. And somewhere in the Gallatin National Forest, on a trail that does not appear correctly on any map, that splits in ways that cannot be explained, that loops back on itself when you try to walk away from it, something is still standing on the path. Still facing the camera. Still waiting. For the next person who takes the wrong fork. Or maybe the fork. Because both forks dead end. That is what the man said. Both forks dead end. And I have been thinking about that since Derek's message arrived in our inbox, turning it over, looking at it from different angles, and I keep coming back to the same question. If both forks dead end, and Derek got out anyway, then what was the thing that was at the trailhead when he left? What was standing there at the forest entrance looking up the trail, into the place Derek had just escaped from? Was it the man from the trail, following Derek out? Or was it something that had come up from the other end? The end that both forks lead to. Sleep well, everyone. I mean that with complete sincerity. Sleep well. Lock your doors. And if you are the kind of person who runs alone on remote trails, I am not telling you to stop. I am just telling you what Derek told me, and what the 42 people in that Canadian study would probably tell you too, if you asked them in a quiet moment. Pay attention to when things feel wrong. Pay attention to the silence of a forest that should not be silent. Pay attention to what your body is trying to tell you before your mind finds a way to argue against it. And if you come to a fork in a trail that should not have a fork, do not ask which way is right. Just turn around. Just go back the way you came. And do not look too carefully into the trees on your way out. Because something might already be looking back. This has been Bella Dark Tales, and this story, The Trail That Leads Somewhere Wrong, is one I will personally be thinking about for a long time. There is something about it, something about the specific texture of what Derek described, the matter-of-fact horror of a man who is rational and experienced and careful and who still got turned around, still heard things, still had something watching him from the trees, that gets under my skin in a way that not every story does. Maybe it is because the wilderness is supposed to be the one place where the rules are simple and honest. You follow the trail. You use your compass. You respect the land and the land lets you pass. That is the deal. That is the agreement. What Derek found is that not every piece of land has agreed to those terms. And that is the kind of thought I am going to be sitting with tonight, whether I want to or not. Derek, thank you again. From the bottom of this dark little heart of mine, thank you for trusting us. We hear you. We believe you. And we are so glad you made it back to the truck. Now, to everyone who has been with us tonight, you beautiful, wonderfully strange people who choose to spend your time in the dark with me listening to stories like this one, thank you. Truly. This channel exists because of you. Every time you share a video, every time you leave a comment, every time you introduce a friend to Bella Dark Tales, you are keeping this little corner of darkness lit, and I am grateful for every single one of you. If this story affected you tonight, if it got under your skin the way it got under mine, I want to hear about it. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me what part got to you. Tell me what you think was standing in those trees. Tell me whether you think the man on the trail was something human, or something else entirely. This community has some of the most thoughtful and genuinely insightful responses of anywhere on this platform, and I read every single comment. Every one. And if you have a story of your own, something that happened to you or someone you know, something that you have been carrying around and need to put down somewhere safe, I want you to know that this is a safe place to put it. Send it to us. Our email is belladarktales@gmail.com. We treat every story with respect and care, and if you want to remain anonymous, we will protect that completely. Your story might be the next one that thousands of people hear on a dark night, and maybe that is exactly what it needs. Maybe it needs to be heard. Maybe you need it to be heard. Like this video if it kept you up. Share it with someone who thinks they do not scare easily. And subscribe if you have not already, because we have stories coming that I genuinely cannot wait to share with you, stories that are going to make tonight feel like a warm-up. This is Bella Dark Tales. Stay curious. Stay careful. And whatever you do, stay on the trail. Good night.